Hello and welcome to another episode of the Film Mavericks show. We are in Las Vegas here at WPPI, and I have some fantastic wedding filmmakers around the couch here. This is actually a pretty cool spot, and this is one of the perks of coming to conferences like this is you never know. You might find yourself in a huge suite with windows on all sides, which we have covered up right now because the lighting would be terrible otherwise. But yeah, that's one of the amazing things about coming to conferences like this is you get to hang out with amazing people, learn from them, and be friends with them, hang out in amazing places, learn so much. And but today we were just kind of chatting about the state of the industry as a whole, but specifically Charlie and I were two of the judges for the filmmaking competition, which, by the way, if you have not ever submitted a film to this competition, you really need to. It was just an amazing experience. We're going to have a whole nother show about just that, I think. So that's for another time. But Charlie was bringing something up to the audience there, which is that we're just in such an incredible time in our industry where, you could spend, $1,000, $2,000 and have the ability to create incredible imagery with the right skill set. And that's a pretty amazing time because, 10 years ago, that would be just so far from the truth. And 5 years ago, even, you'd be so limited with a budget like that. And so we're just in a pretty incredible time. And I thought it'd be interesting because of how things are advancing so rapidly, because of the new things that camera manufacturers are putting out all the time. Sony just made a big announcement. They have a new cool lens coming out. It's like a 135-1.8, I believe.
Yes.
Of course, we've been doing other stuff on this channel about the Lumix S1 and S1R and some lenses that are coming with that, as well as I'm not sure about the timing of when these will come out, but we just talked to Sigma, and they've got 11 lenses that they're doing in their art line. And, Canon's a whole nother story. We can talk about that too. But it's an amazing time. There are amazing tools from a host of manufacturers out there. And so I thought it'd be good. We haven't done this in a long time. We generally, if you're new to this show, we generally talk more about filmmaking techniques and business strategies and those sort of things to really help filmmakers elevate their game. But every once in a while, it's kind of fun to nerd out and talk about the gear and the tools. And I think it's something that we all love and enjoy and appreciate, just kind of geeking out with people who actually get what we're talking about in person. Because typically if we're having these conversations, it's only online because our friends would slap us in the face if we started talking about these things because they have no idea what we're talking about. So, yeah. I thought this would be a good time to do that. So why don't we go around and do some introductions before we start? So you can kick it off, Larry.
I'm Larry Marshall Camera Wedding Films. I was in Indiana, moved to Orange County, living in Huntington Beach now, and that whole big move, and so I'm doing not rebranding, but I'm in the process of getting contacts again, starting the network again. It's a lot of work, and it's going to be a process. Yeah.
And actually, while we're going around too, maybe since the conversation is about equipment, maybe say what camera system you're currently using,
sure.
And if you have recent experience with other cameras, maybe say that as well.
I think I'm the person who's shot on. Am I the only person who's shot on every major manufacturer in the last 3 years flagship cameras?
I think you were.
Probably, yeah.
So Canon up until 2015, then Sony A7S II in 2016. These are full years, and then starting in 2017 and continuing till now, I'm on the GH5. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Hi there. I'm Charlie Hilbrand from Chicago, and I work a lot with Larry, and so we've sort of evolved in the equipment game similarly. Right now, we're using the Canon 1DX Mark II, and just kind of fell in love with that image, and it's been what's working for us. But I'm not married to any particular manufacturer or spec. I just think what serves a story is what we should be using. Let's see. What else? What am I missing? I
Company name.
Company name. It's the most original name you can imagine.
Can anyone guess it?
Charlie
Charlie
Hilbrand
Hilbrand
Films.
Films, okay.
There you go. I think I said
It
to Taylor,
works.
like, I really need to work on my marketing. When I was on the Film Mavericks podcast.
Well, my name's just really long, so I need to work
Marshall
on it,
Camera
too.
Wedding Films.
Takes forever to say.
So Charlie Hilbrand Films, and I'm just loving being here, immersed with among so much talent. And speaking of talent,
My name is Taylor. A lot of you have probably heard or seen me. I am one of the producers and sometimes co-host of this show. I work for Jordan, so I primarily shoot on the Panasonic Lumix system. I've done everything from GH4 to G85 to GH5, and even recently gotten my hands on the new S1, which is pretty awesome so far.
Indeed.
So yeah, that's me.
I'm John Snyder, and I by the way, I apologize. My voice is a little out, so you have to bear with me. My company name is Jonathan and Kay, based out of Atlanta. Work with my wife, full-time, husband and wife team. And the Canon system, the system of gear that we use is Canon. We've pretty much been at Canon for pretty much most of our career, though we did technically start at Panasonic. Little known fact.
Which one?
AVX 200.
Now you've
Sound
dated
about right?
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super old.
At least it wasn't the DVX 100B.
Could have been worse.
I remember one of the cameras had the P2 card, and the other
Yeah,
one
it's the
had
HVX
the
200. Yeah.
SD cards.
Yeah, the first solid state recording.
And we started off with after Panasonic, we went to Canon 60Ds, 5D Mark IIs, 5D Mark III, 5D Mark IV. But we're currently using two 1DX Mark IIs and two 5D Mark IVs.
Nice.
Nice, yeah.
And if you're new to the channel, I'm a Lumix Global Ambassador, so I shoot with like all the Lumix cameras. That's why Taylor talked about the S1 that we're pretty pumped to get our hands on over the last couple weeks. And we might, at some point in the conversation, hit on that. But pretty cool that we have people who have very recently shot with all the major manufacturers. I understand that there are people who, yes, they might shoot with Fuji or Nikon, but those are few and far between. I think in our specific world of wedding and commercial filmmaking, probably pretty rare. So I think we kind of covered our bases. Yeah, cool. So talk to me about, let's start here. As wedding and commercial filmmakers, what are the primary things that you're looking for in a camera system?
I personally am a minimalist. So I really enjoy having the Micro Four Thirds sensor system because those cameras are a lot smaller, a lot more lightweight than others that I've seen, like some of the Canons. Sony is a little as Micro Four Thirds, so they're similar, but I like the Lumix cameras.
It's mirrorless, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Terms.
I think everybody
I'm
knew
not
what you
as
meant.
big a
but
nerd with all
yeah.
the terms,
Yeah, I get
but yeah, okay. So I like it, and I like the lenses that go with it, and I really just think the G85 and the GH5, the image stabilization is so incredible that I now run around handheld almost 2/3 of a wedding day, and it's been so freeing to not have to think about a lot of different gear or stabilization techniques, and now I kind of just use like those stabilization techniques for certain shots when I want them, like the gimbal or the monopod. But it's nice knowing that I can just run and gun. I can be somewhere super fast, get the shots I need, minimal gear, and I'm not bogged down. So I really like things to be minimal on a wedding day, and I have my go-to lenses and things to kind of keep everything simple.
I think once you go IBIS, it's
You can't go back.
It's
You
really
hard
hard.
to
I
go
did.
That would
back.
be terrible.
yeah, and there's some.
I did.
Yeah,
And
some people do.
GH5.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Yeah.
It's still tough, and you wish, but you would want it if Canon said here it is. You wouldn't be like, dang,
It depends on
what
I
did they
sacri-
sacrifice?
It depends on what I
know?
sacrificed to get
Yeah.
it. I mean, everyone would want it, but
Yeah,
I
well, that's what I'm
know.
saying. It's amazing. It really is.
But
It just takes out all those little microgeners. Even if you're still shooting on a monopod, I can shoot monopod 200 because of it. I couldn't do that without having to put some sort of warp stabilization on it in post.
Yeah.
And so my post is faster.
Well, I remember I used to, when I was shooting the GH4, I had to apply a stabilization to every single clip.
Right.
And then sometimes it wouldn't handle it well, so I'd be like, all right, well, I got to get rid of that clip, you know?
Because that wobble effect that we were talking about yesterday,
Yep.
when we saw a lot of films where, so stabilization systems inside of Premiere or Final Cut, they're not perfect. So they're going to give this the edges. If you ever want to check your stabilization, make sure it's like, I don't know, what's a good way to put it? Acceptable.
Yeah.
Look at the edge of your
noticeable.
frame and just notice what the edge is doing. So if it's going to be noticeable, you're going to have like it's wobble is the best way to describe it. It's going to like
There's a little warp.
yeah, a little. Sometimes it's
Little
so
jello-y.
much so
That's
that
why
it's
they call it warp
distracting.
stabilization.
Yeah.
It'll warp.
Must be it.
Yeah.
It'll warp.
It'll warp.
It'll warp.
It'll
It'll
warp.
warp. It'll warp. So yeah, it's not a fix-all solution. That was my
Yeah.
point.
So what else? What are you looking for then in camera?
I am looking for a great representation of skin tones. I am looking for. I'm not any longer looking for minimalism. I'm looking for an image that has certain components to the image in the way that it handles highlights. I base everything off of how a toast is going to look, and I reverse engineer everything else. I don't really care too much any longer about the IBIS. I loved it on the GH5, but I want highlight roll-off to be abrupt and beautiful in the way that the 1DX does it. So when we have a toast giver lit nicely, because I build my film around the toast. So I'm looking for that. I'm looking for the Canon skin tones and autofocus. I've been using the autofocus on the 1DX Mark II, and one of our friends, Amber, brought up a really good point, because I said, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of cheating, right? We're at the front of the processional, and the autofocus just tracks the person the whole way, 30 seconds of perfect autofocus. And it's so perfect that I just feel like, man, this should be more of a challenge.
Have you ever had it just tragically fail, though? I mean, I feel like I stopped using it because every once in a while I would just pick a different subject and just completely racked somewhere else.
Well, I use the face tracking only for the processional. And so if I turn
does
on...
it pick up other people's faces?
It does not. It knows, because most of the time, if...
Do you tap the screen and like say that face?
No.
Okay.
No,
it just picks it up
says
at some point.
This. Now, it's entirely possible that at some point, probably next weekend, all of a sudden it's going to... I'm going to pick up a bridesmaid or something.
I learned not to use it on the dances because, once people start spinning around and...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Good autofocus has been great, but to finish that up, I can get a little bit long-winded. Sorry about that, guys. Our friend Amber said, on a Hollywood shoot, you're going to have a focus puller, and that's what their job is. So we have basically put a little focus puller inside the camera, and that's what it's doing. So I appreciate what that has given me.
Instead of paying a human, you're paying Canon to do it for you.
Yeah. Right. They've taken your job as first AC.
Yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah,
Anyway.
I did. I was a first AC. At this point, it's like 5 years ago now. But that's where I started in cameras, as well as doing focus pulling, and so I'm actually looking for, in a system, I'm looking for good autofocus. I don't, at this point, it's very clear to me that like the future is going to be autofocus, as much as that pains me, because like I made a living off of pulling manual lenses and it being how I support myself and a craft. But I'm not sure about the cinema world, but in the one-man band world, I absolutely like, at this point, I don't want to buy into a system.
Or one-woman band.
Yeah, I don't want to buy into a system that's not going to give me that option, even if I don't use it. Because for me right now, like I don't even think about focusing, even though I'm doing it manually. It's so second nature to me. But the people that haven't, like, I've just been doing it for 10 years. And so I'm just, I'll get stuff in focus, I don't know, maybe faster than autofocus. And it would be nice to not have to think about it, but it's not holding me back unless I'm doing gimbal moves. That's actually what I'm looking forward to the most, is like, I want to be able to shoot tighter on gimbal.
Yeah.
And not, because right now I'm just flying a 12 to 35, and I'm kind of staying at 12, which is a 24 equivalent. And I'm fully manual because the depth is so great at that point.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what I'm looking for. I won't buy into a new system until I see that it has good autofocus. And at this point, like I said, has to have IBIS.
Yeah.
I'm not interested without it at this point. Because, yeah, I've started just shooting handheld in preps. Even without the dual system with a native Panasonic lens, still works really great with my Sigmas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think one thing you do really well when you're handheld is you do what Jordan was saying today when he was on stage, just a little bit of a rock.
Yeah.
And
Subtle.
I'm not going to make you
move.
get up and recreate it, but it's just a little thing like this, and just that little bit of motion moving the frame.
And I'll
that's
still put
something
warp
you
on that.
can't- That's something you can't do without IBIS because you can't recreate that. Otherwise, you're going to have either a slider or a gimbal. You're not going to do that on monopod because it's going to tilt.
No, your horizon will
You
go.
know, and so
Which I did that already. That was already me 3 years ago.
Right.
And I look at that and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, exactly. Until they had come up with a different axis
Yeah,
for a monopod, which would be
ooh,
cool.
that'd be cool.
So if you're listening,
Yeah.
manufacturers, do that.
Sue.
But otherwise, like, yeah, you can't pull that move off without like the clunkiness of having to have a slider on a tripod or bringing a gimbal to all the shots, which I don't know. I hate bringing a gimbal into situations like that. It's not a good situation to be bringing a gimbal into a bride suite. And I get it. You can get some cool shots, but it's just too much, I think, for most situations to be bringing that kind of equipment into a room like that.
Can I say why I agree with you?
Yeah.
No.
I think that we see these types of tools every day. The goal as filmmakers, I think, sometimes should be, especially in bride or groom prep, to let them have moments where you're not disturbing it,
Yeah.
and you're going to get better imagery that way. If they see a tool like a gimbal or a slider, it's bringing in an unfamiliar object,
Yeah.
and it's very abrupt visually. I mean, even though some people, it's unlike anything anybody's ever seen. It's like alien
They
spacecraft.
look weird, you know? It's like
People do stare at them,
yeah.
and they
Yeah,
have
they-
questions about them.
your
They
footprint
want to
just
play with it.
expanded.
Your footprint just expanded. It's the best way. He's far more
It takes me
articulate.
20 seconds, but I'll figure it out.
Far more
That's
articulate than I. So I just feel like we should be making it, I think, a global goal to preserve the sterile nature of that room. Let the room happen. Let the moments happen without us putting that footprint on it. And so with the GH5, what I respect about it, it allows you to preserve those moments so that groom is thinking about his father tying his bow tie, not about the crazy whiz bop that you're, holding. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially the bride too, like to just walk in there, just me and one little camera in my hand that a lot of times just right up on my chest and barely noticeable. I can blend in so seamlessly. Sometimes I don't think people even know I'm in there. And then when I do have to get specific shots where I'm, closer up to the bride or I'm telling them what I'm doing, she's more at ease, and there's not a lot of stuff going on. There's not a lot of equipment. It's just like one little camera. And sometimes people are even like, wow, you're doing video on that? Like,
Yeah, your footprint's literally smaller than the photographer's.
yeah. And sometimes the
Oh, yeah.
photographer's in there with a bunch of other stuff going on and moving around. And
Everything's hanging off their body.
yeah,
And you're
so it
just like,
it does feel really good to just be able to be so minimal and then really just be in tune with the people, and they're going to feel a little more calm, especially if it's a kind of bride that's like, I don't really know how I feel about being on camera. I'm not very good with stuff like that.
Which I think leads into a little bit of like when I go in, like I do not bust out my video stuff until I've like said hi to her. Like there's not a camera right away. Nobody even knows I'm really doing video unless I say, hey, I'm doing video and all that stuff. And I'll go off and shoot the details if I have timing, allows. But I'll do that in a different room so that they're just not constantly seeing work happening and like cameras. Because I will do details on a slider. I actually only keep a 6-inch slider because I just want that little move. But that's it. You got to give them time to like get acclimated to your presence.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's still I talked to Taylor about that a couple months ago. That's a coffee trick.
Yep.
You just walk into the preps
Yeah, I remember
with
that.
a coffee,
Yeah.
nothing else in your hand.
Yeah, then you seem so chill, and then they vibe
what-
off that, and they're like, "Oh,
Let's talk
this
about-
isn't stressful."
Let's talk about
Let me
symbols.
before we move, I do want to
Yeah.
hear from
Yes,
I do want to hear from
yeah.
Jonathan. I want to hear
course, sorry.
what you're
So
looking
What you're looking for in a camera?
What I'm looking for in a camera. For me, I feel like it's a little different just because how entrenched I am with lenses and the systems. I mean, it would take a lot. I mean, I love the look of the Canon. I love the 4K imagery that it produces. But if another camera body comes out, it's just like it would take an awful lot for me to have to start thinking about switching to a different system. I mean, we have like 12, 14 lenses in the Canon ecosystem, and just I mean,
20 grand.
I mean,
At
more,
least.
way more. And just thinking about that, I'm like, well, I mean, there's a good resale value on it, but it would take an awful lot. Like, Canon would really have to go further into kind of like not acknowledging
Not
this
supporting
segment of
you
the
anymore.
industry to.
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things too. Is like that conversation is becoming less and less prevalent because everybody makes adapters for EF mount, right? Sigma already. I was talking to Sigma earlier today, and they said they're going to have an EF adapter for the Leica L mount for the Lumix S1. So and I think
the MC21, I believe.
that's, man, you're such a nerd. Yep, that's correct.
Hello.
Yes. So that
good
part
point.
of things, like, that's always been a part of the conversation. In fact, I was talking with Marshall, who's off camera over here, earlier today. He was saying every time I have a conversation with a Nikon photographer, they say something to the effect of, yeah, well, I just have so many lenses. It's such a hassle, and like, especially if you're invested in the Canon system, EF has sort of, in a lot of ways, has become the standard where, most cinema cameras, you can get a EF mount. And so everybody's making EF adapters for every other type of mount. And so that conversation is becoming
I do still
different.
prefer the image of the Canon 4K.
Yeah.
More so than the Panasonic and the Sony, though. To be honest, the Panasonic definitely has come a long ways to bridging that gap with my preference. And that's what you wanted me to say, right?
Well, I think just in terms
Checks
of
in the mail.
Jordan, why are you paying John right now?
I think just in terms of, that's one of the conversations we were having earlier before this started, is, so maybe we can talk about that now, actually. So we were having this conversation. Two of these guys had a conversation with Canon in their booth with a particular representative. But one of the things that you kind of came back to was, well, maybe we should jump in and we can go there. So
We're going there.
yeah,
It's happening.
Let's just go there. And this is two guys who shoot with the two Canon shooters here. So tell me about your experience.
Barley and Ron.
So you guys went into the Canon booth here in the expo and had a conversation with we'll just call them Bob, the sales rep. They actually had a higher position ranking than the person that you talked to. So
Can you do me a favor and grab the card? I just want to get his position, just so the audience
Can you
knows.
just say the position there?
Yeah.
Senior Professional Marketing Specialist. So that's a pretty high ranking. It's a senior executive type of position. Senior Professional Market Specialist.
So this would be the person who we would approach.
If you were going to talk to one person at the booth, that would have been that person.
Well, I'd already talked to someone else, and they directed me towards him and said he was the guy to talk to.
Okay.
And, well, let me give a little preface. The whole reason I wanted to speak to Canon. I've been doing this actually for the last couple shows I've been to, and I remember the last time I went to imaging in Nashville, I tried to speak to people because, us Canon people, we're kind of like, what would you call us? We're just. I don't even know. We have to stick together. I mean, it's hard looking at the Panasonic and Sony, because they have their reps. Jordan is a Panasonic rep. We were at, Amber and Garrett's class before.
I'm not a Panasonic rep, just for the record.
What did I say?
Well, the reps are like they're employees, so I'm not an employee.
You're an
of
ambassador,
Lumix.
sorry.
Yeah.
I just meant that you are. Panasonic recognizes you as an ambassador. They recognize you as someone in the industry who can carry influence and also who can really bring the Panasonic culture to the wedding filmmakers community, and not just wedding, but wedding and events and kind of all that. But Sony has Amber and Garrett, just to name a few. I don't think, does Nikon do it, but.
That's a funny story, actually. We were walking by the Nikon booth, and I don't want to say, I don't even know who it was actually, but somebody was there at the Nikon booth, showing off a wedding film that we would have judged in the 60s yesterday, showing off on the Nikon stage. So
as
apparently they
a
do
reference,
have,
how's a 60 in terms of a score?
Oh, sorry. So 60 is the lowest score. So it's
I thought you said
60
61.
to 100. So the film that was being showed off as the standard in the Nikon booth was it would have been ranked, very low.
So anyway, it's frustrating being a Canon guy and seeing that the other camera manufacturers recognize these people to carry the culture and to really be able to talk about their cameras and to the film community. So it feels like we're neglected. It's like we're holding out and hoping for that announcement that redeems our brand loyalty,
so that we can say, that's why I waited for so
That's
long.
why I
That's why I
waited.
hung on.
But it's been years. I feel like that's been said. You've been feeling neglected for years.
Well, I don't want to say too neglected because I still do believe that the image quality that Canon produces is definitely at I don't want to say at the top of the pack. This is
You can say that. It's your opinion. You
my
can say what you
opinion at
want.
the top of the pack.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just wait, what were you saying?
Just that how long how long it's been since. How long have you felt that way? Basically, like
Pretty much ever since it started.
ever
We all
since
know
it
we all know
started.
that since it started with the first camera, but we all know
Yeah.
Canon. We know that they're a day late and a dollar short most
you
of
have
the time.
these Sony artisans who are creative, and they're
And they have
of-
events
they have
like
events.
in LA that are they're called Be Alpha, and you just feel their presence, and I just don't feel Canon's
the brand
presence. Yeah,
The brand presence is not
for
represented
the up and
by-
coming talent.
For the up and coming talent is not represented by anybody in particular, and I think that maybe the point was that it really could be. We're missing out on opportunity.
And not that there isn't amazing talent on Canon. It's just that they're not using you.
Yeah,
But
there's
they're
two people on
leaving.
this couch who are producing amazing work.
Yeah,
with
it's
Canon
not that
cameras.
they're just not using.
Yeah.
I feel like they're not getting you guys out there enough.
Okay, so
My
let's-
face isn't pretty enough.
Go back
I want
to the
to go.
story.
I want to go back to the story. You guys had a conversation with
Yeah.
the.
So I had a
whatever.
conversation with Bob, and the whole point of the conversation was because I wanted to bring awareness to the fact that this is kind of like a hole in this industry that I'm noticing, and I kind of wanted his feedback. I kind of wanted him to say, "Wow, you're right. We really do need to be doing more for that community." And I don't know if you heard me, Charlie, but I kind of said, "Hey, Charlie, come over here." But I'm not sure what point you joined in on the conversation. So basically, what Bob was saying, I'm kind of jumping in the middle, but he was refuting every point I was bringing about how, the Canon is neglecting our segment in terms of the cameras that they're putting out, the fact that there's no what Canon calls actually the explorers of light, and there are a ton of explorers of light in the photography world, and there's even a few of them in the upper echelon of filmmaking, like in Hollywood side. But he was basically refuting all that. Charlie, what did you say?
Completely. I think from my viewpoint, I heard some excuses. I heard some defensiveness. I heard a lack of acknowledgement of what we're pointing out from being on the front lines, saying, here's what we're seeing. And I just saw sort of a refusal to look at the truth of, because we are feeling, we're on the front lines. We're the boots on the ground. So to have somebody say, no, that's not really what is going on. Like, well,
give me an example
what-
of like something that was said and a response.
This feels like leading.
Just, it's open ended. Give me an example.
So, the example that everyone wants to hear is when we're talking about the amount of filmmakers. First of all, first we're talking about specs, and we're talking about how the Canon specs are lagging behind the other camera manufacturers like Panasonic, Nikon, even Fuji now. And Sony. And he's basically saying that all the Canon spec. He kept diverting back to color science and the
Durability.
autofocus. But the thing is, we all know that the other manufacturers have really bridged the gap in those areas, and to a point where it is preference of which one you like better, more so than it is just Canon dominance in those areas.
Sure.
But the really, you almost have to say funny at this point, part was when he was saying that the market that Canon, the executives are interested in is the ultra high end wedding filmmakers market, and he was basically saying that those people should be using C500s and C700s with cinema glass, and what he was projecting that the wedding filmmaker community as a whole should be aspiring to having those camera bodies and lenses.
Yeah. So I recently watched a podcast that my friend Rob Adams and Charles King did, where they're talking about. Did you watch this?
I didn't. But
Okay. Well,
I know the summary.
okay. Well, they were talking about basically having a deep knowledge of what your expenses are, so you understand exactly how much you make. The title of the podcast was "Wedding Filmmakers Make Less Than Fast Food Workers," or it was something like that, or make less than McDonald's workers, right? Because that's the whole fight for $15 an hour, and he was doing the math and being very generous with his math and the way he structured things. You know, if you made $3,500 in a wedding and you shot 30 weddings, and here's your expenses, and kind of laid everything out, and you ended up making, $10 an hour. And, so if that is a normal thing for wedding filmmakers, to imagine trying to have them convince you to buy a $33,000 camera body, a C700, and some cinema lenses, $5,000-$10,000 a pop, and then you've got to buy several of those because you can't shoot a wedding with one camera, so you're buying 2 or 3 of these things, maybe 4. Like, this is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. You cannot possibly.
You make more money renting those out.
You better, seriously, that's actually true. Yeah, I mean, you better be making 6 figures per wedding if you're going to be spending that kind of money on camera systems.
I'm just glad Charlie was there to hear it, because I was so astounded about what I was hearing about that.
Well, to say that that's what we should aspire to shoot on, or that's the benchmark we should be looking toward, is just false. It's just objectively false. I mean, we're seeing cameras that are coming out. I mean, look at the imagery that you were showing today on your stage from the GH5. It was beautiful. I even said out loud to John, I said, "That's gorgeous."
It was all right.
Thank
And
you,
I
Charlie.
just,
Gets the job done.
really, I don't mean to be, but I thought to myself, what client would want more than that?
Right.
So to say that, like,
Point of diminishing returns.
absolutely.
It's like
Well, explain
we've
that.
reached it. Explain diminishing returns.
Yeah, in
The
concept.
idea that we can get 100 to when a bride looks at something or a couple looks at something and they are completely and totally happy with it. At what point are you just spending money that is beyond what they're going to even comprehend? So it's like there's that sweet spot. There's that spot where the value to what you're getting starts to curve off, and that's the point where the diminishing returns is hitting. So if you're going for value, it seems like Canon is like not really there.
Which is why, I think I have 9 or 10 G85 cameras, which you can buy for $700 or $800 now.
Yeah.
Because for me, there's a steep curve after that, and I've invested in more expensive cameras as well for certain use cases. But for the volume of work that we do, this just makes a ton of sense because it's right at that curve where
It gets you to 90%.
exactly,
And they're not going to notice that last 10%, but your
Right.
pocket will when
Sure.
it's a lot lighter.
Especially when a lot of it also has to do with the skills of the filmmakers.
100%.
Because as much as we love to talk about gear, you can have the best camera out there and still not be good at the basics and not have your stuff together as a shooter. So having these cameras, but then also the choices we make to make these films for our clients makes a big difference as well.
I had a filmmaker. His name is Sebastian Nandraka on my show. I don't know, year and a half ago, maybe even. But I had him on my show because he posted a wedding film on one of the groups, and I was just shocked at this thing. I was like, "Good grief! I've never seen anything like this." Period.
Good or bad?
It depends on your preference. It vastly depends on your preference. It's a very polarizing film, but
Memorable.
But I say it's genius. I think that what he did was genius. It's shocking. It's exactly what his clients wanted, and he is the only person on the planet I know that could have pulled it off. Just a brilliant filmmaker in his own right. And I got to talking to him, and he shot this thing on a G7, a $400 camera, and it was just that shocked me, because it is that is so much of the conversation, is that we're having this conversation because we like to nerd out on this stuff sometimes, but that's why we don't talk about this a ton on the podcast. It's because it's so much more about the filmmaker. That's what I'm interested in talking about that, but we are having a gear conversation.
Hold on. To finish his story up, so basically he was alluding to the fact that they're only really interested in weddings such as like the royal wedding that just happened. And
Literally,
Oh,
He's-
that's
that's
all
what
my
he said.
weddings, right?
I said that as an example, and he said, yes, it's exactly right. So that is the market that Canon is after. I mean, the whole point of even telling the story is just to kind of further illustrate what we already know to be that Canon is kind of, or just not kind of, but extremely out of touch with our segment of the wedding film market. And I mean, they're producing great bodies, but in their minds, those are photographers' cameras. And they don't really see them as filmmaking tools. So,
Do
A
you
la
feel
the
like
EOS RP.
Do you feel like you were listening
R.I.P.
to? Yeah, no. Do you feel like you were listened to?
it's hard to say. I mean, I will say this. I mean, this is part of the story that I'm not sure I left off to you or whatnot, but he did tell me that he is going to be meeting a bunch of Canon execs next week, and he said, hey, look, send me an email tonight, and I will bring it to them. But it's just too many layers of I don't want to say bureaucracy, but too many layers of executives, and it's just nobody with a pulse to the finger to the pulse in the industry.
I want to tell another story because it contrasts so shockingly. Last week, I was in Austin, Texas, at the Lumix S1 launch event, and they brought in camera dealers, people who are selling these cameras at the camera stores, and then the next day they brought in influencers, people, YouTubers, things like that. But the engineers, the head engineers who designed the S cameras were there in the room from Japan. And the first day before all the other people came in, I was there with the Lumix team in a training event situation, and the guy who was leading the training situation, he's Matt Frazier. I've had him on the podcast before. Anyways, he told me that he had a feature that he believed could be fixed in software, and he mentioned it to the engineer, and the engineer said, "Oh yeah, we can do that." And they put out a firmware, the next firmware release that was put out, put that feature in there. I mean, and that's how in touch camera manufacturers can be with their users if they choose to be. So that's what's probably frustrating for Canon users, is just like that they could do that, but they just don't.
What was the feature?
I can't remember. I
don't know if you remembered.
No, I don't remember.
Okay.
It was Matt is like the super technical guy with everything, and I'm just like, it needs to work, and I know 80% of what the camera does, and he knows 100% of what the camera does, and all the things that he would like it to do, and so he's the extra tech guy in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then you hear stories like that, and you're like, why aren't they like that?
When they could be.
It's so easy.
Yeah, because so much of these things can be fixed with firmware.
Yeah.
Because these cameras are super capable. They have incredible chips in them. They're powerful computers.
Just look
that
at
are in
Magic
there.
Lantern. Remember that? I mean, I don't advocate for hacking your camera. You're gonna,
But they prove something, right?
Yeah.
which is just what you're saying. Look how powerful these cameras are, and could be via a firmware update.
Right. Yep.
So the whole point of the meeting was I'm trying to advocate for Canon to care more, and we'll see if that comes to any fruit. But I mean, this is like the third time I've spoken with a Canon rep about this at one of these events, and every time they kind of give the same answer of, well, we know we need to be doing more, but we're not. And it's pretty much how it ended.
Because it takes a lot of force to move a sleeping giant, maybe. I mean,
Can I ask a question?
I mean, every like podcast, every YouTube channel that I listen to that talks about this stuff, they all say the same thing. So there's a very loud majority who are saying these things. So it doesn't give me a whole lot of hope that something like that would. it's not even that I don't want to. It's like, and I've said before several times is, yes, I'm sponsored by Panasonic, but if I find a tool that I would prefer to use that's going to help me further my business more, I will leave Panasonic and switch to that camera. Like, I genuinely would, because I'm going to make a whole lot more money off of my business than I do off of my sponsorship with them. It would be foolish for me not to. And so, I think that it's so important to sort of keep that in light of all of these conversations.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Assuming that we're being heard, what would be something we would all agree on to be a good actionable first step or first couple steps that we would accept as, okay, we were heard and some things are, tides changing a little bit?
I mean, the first would be to get some people in our industry to kind of be those influencers, those culture carriers, much like the other people do. And I think through those people, they can kind of get a better feel for some of the things that are needed. Because, those influencers would know the main gripes that we have with the cameras. I mean, they're pretty well known.
Yeah, because, they'll be reading their YouTube comments and they can see all that stuff. And that they'll internalize it and then express it.
And they're also using the equipment
using it
on a regular basis and have their frustrations themselves.
Yeah.
So
it would be a great idea for them to have that, because they can get a better read for the market. They can get those suggestions and comments into people who will actually do something about it. But I hope so. But we'll see if they do.
You have something you want to say, Taylor?
I'm just wondering, I'm curious just because I don't really know a whole lot about Canon. Do you think it's like an issue of like photography versus videography? Like they're looking just to be like more for high-end video, but like, is that the same for photo, or are they just
You mean
more
why they're not
interested
listening?
Well, you say like we just really care about people having C700s and being like high-end videographers. Is that how they feel about their photographers, or do they have like cameras for everyone and like
Do photographers have the same frustrations?
Yeah,
is it? I
I
don't know.
don't think so.
No, because their bodies max out at.
So they're just
1DX.
more interested
Yeah.
in photography as opposed to
It's a bigger market.
Yeah,
You know,
giant.
Photography is a much bigger market than filmmakers at this point in time. I don't know how long that's going to be true.
But the thing is, photography hasn't really changed as much over the last 10 years as video has. And Canon has dominated photography for a long time, just because with the camera, the features that they have. But it's kind of like photography is kind of like audio. Audio has kind of been maxed out with how good we can get for a number of years.
Yeah.
And we can make tweaks. But for video, it's been leaps and bounds over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Leaps and bounds over the last 5 years.
Yep.
And so that's why I don't think it's as big of a deal for photography.
Yeah.
I just wonder why they wouldn't have like a team of people as part of Canon that are really interested in being involved in that evolution.
It's such a small part of the market share, and it's reading between the lines, and it's what it's all about, because they make so much money on everything else that's not wedding filmmakers.
Just printers. That might be
It's a whole-
that might be the biggest part of their market. Is
You really think printers?
It might be. Did you see how many printers they had? They had more printers going on there.
I saw a ton of printers down there.
Yeah, than cameras. They had way more space taken up with printers. It's definitely an important, a huge part of.
But it's what that means is ink, because printers is not a high margin item, but ink is really where it's at, because my wife uses a Canon printer, and she can go through $500 in ink in like a couple days of printing.
Yeah.
Man.
Yep. Well, our timing wise, we need to cut this conversation off. Any last closing remarks?
May I?
Yeah.
I think we need to set the tone here for reminding everybody that it really is about your skills and not the cameras.
Absolutely. Yep. And again, why we spend 99% of this show, of our YouTube channel, talking about all this. And in the background, you will see a lovely man.
Cutting out of drinking time, fellas. What is going on? What is happening?
This is an amazing show that we just are putting on
Yes,
here.
it's really-
Jason Group, ladies and gentlemen, the current occupier of this spectacular suite that we're in, and the host of this party that we are about to enjoy, and a bunch of other people are going to join us. So again, another reason why you need to come to industry events like this one and like Shutterfest.
It's been so
Yeah.
fun.
True.
Yep.
It's been so fun getting to see all the faces and getting to meet people that you talk to on a daily basis. Like Charlie is so tall. Who knew?
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Film Mavericks Show, and we'll see you on the next one.
The Film Mavericks podcast is produced by Taylor Juarez and Teddy Findus. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss a show, and help us out by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. And when you're done, head on over to the Film Mavericks YouTube channel for the video version of this show, as well as weekly tutorials, film critiques, and much more.